Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. We're back again. God, that week off that we had felt like a lifetime, but I actually really needed it because first two races after the summer break were pretty chaotic and there was so much, not so much drama, but there was just so much going on and everyone was up at a 10. Like I felt like everything was just dialed up and everybody's emotions and feelings were so heightened that after Monza, I was kind of glad that we had a week off because I felt like we all needed it. Felt like we all just needed to take a minute, breathe, and come back relaxed and ready for the next race, which is Baku. And I kind of feel like it will go one of two ways. Baku either delivers absolute bangers or it's a bit dull. It's either one of the two. Do you know what I mean? We tend to go through phases of it being really good and then it's been really dull, and then last year was pretty decent. Wonder what this year will bring. Well, we're about to find out. Now, we are obviously here to make our predictions, but before we get into those, I want to touch on some news that came out of the sport, which we've kind of already discussed when it was a leak, but now it's confirmed, and that is the 2026 sprint allocation, which is kind of questionable on some fronts, and I'm kind of alright with it on the others. This week, Formula One unveiled the sprint race calendar for 2026 and the start times for all of the Grand Prix across next year. The 2026 calendar will continue to have 6 venues for the sprints. The venues will be Shanghai, Miami and Silverstone, which are all returning to the sprint calendar, and Montreal, Zandvoort and Singapore, which are all debuting. Now, Formula One has said they're sticking to 6 sprint races for next year because they don't want to increase the burden on the teams, which are already grappling with a huge and pretty sweeping regulation change going into next year. However, that's not to say we won't see an increase in those in the future. In terms of the venues for next year, China should be pretty decent. There's plenty of overtaking opportunities there, so it should make for an alright sprint. We obviously did a sprint race there this year, and I don't remember it being terrible. It definitely wasn't the dullest, let's say that. I'm quite happy for them to continue having sprint races at Miami because, quite frankly, I feel like that track just needs something to make it a little bit more interesting because the racing and everything's incredibly dull. I actually think the only way that Miami really gives us anything is if the weather plays a part in it, which you can't count on, but I'm quite happy for the sprints to stay in Miami. Silverstone coming back to the sprint calendar. We had a sprint there in 2021, I believe was the last time when we debuted the sprints. I don't think we've done one there since. Indifferent to Silverstone hosting a sprint race. I get annoyed when they start fiddling about with Silverstone because I just think, just leave the British GP alone. It doesn't need sprint races or anything like that to make it interesting. It's already a very interesting weekend. Quali's always pretty decent and so is the race. I understand that they want to have competitive sessions across all days, so I sometimes just kind of think leave Silverstone alone. But I'm not opposed to it 100%. Again, similar to China, there should be plenty of overtaking opportunities, so I'm not completely against it. Canada should also be pretty decent, I think. Plenty of opportunities there. Singapore. I just don't get the decision to have Singapore as a sprint race. I understand the concept of the sprint race. You want to have competitive sessions across every day, whether it's qualifying or a race, but Singapore's not really a track that lends itself massively to overtaking. And are we going to see anything other than a procession during a sprint race in Singapore? I feel like it'd be like having a sprint race in Monaco. It just doesn't feel right. I feel like it would be quite boring. The only thing that I think could make Singapore more interesting is just the fact that it'll be held earlier in the day than what we usually see the sessions at Singapore. But even at that, I don't think it's enough to make the sprint race interesting. I've done these all topsy-turvy, but Zandvoort having a sprint race again, I'm not opposed to. It could be interesting. It's a nice send-off for them. Zandvoort invites the dive bomb. But then, are we really going to see drivers doing dive bombs and potentially crashing their cars or risking any damage when they've got qualifying later that day? That's the only thing that's really going to pull back the stakes in the sprint race, is the fact that they have qualifying after. So the sprints tend to be a little bit duller just because they don't want to do anything too mental. We also don't know the performances of these cars for next year. There could be quite big gaps in the performances, which will just make the sprint races even more dull. I mean, I don't know. Only time will tell. We'll find out next year. But in terms of the actual calendar, I'm indifferent to it, shall we say. Formula One has also said that they're in conversations with the teams and everything like that about the idea of potentially increasing the amount of sprint races for the 2027 calendar at the earliest, and it could see it going up to around 10 to 12 sprint races in 2027 onwards. They have said that they're still in discussion with the 11 teams about the potential of adding more sprint races in. Stefano Domenicali and Mohammed Ben Sulayem have all said that the promoters and the sponsors and the broadcasters and everything are in favour of increasing the amount of sprint races. The FIA and Formula One just want to increase the amount of competitive sessions. The more competitive sessions in a weekend, the more likely that people will buy tickets to the whole weekend rather than just the Grand Prix on a Sunday, shall we say. The broadcasters will love that because there'll be more people that watch the broadcast through the whole weekend rather than just the race on a Sunday. Promoters will love it, tracks will love it. It's a money grab, to be quite honest. The whole reason of having more competitive sessions across the weekend is so that the fans are willing to spend more money to attend a whole weekend rather than just parts of it. I get it, feels like nothing more than just a bit of a blatant cash grab. I don't see many fans asking for more sprint sessions. I don't know how the teams will feel about it. The sprint races put a lot of pressure on the teams in getting the cars set up and a lot of pressure on the drivers and everything like that. So it's an interesting one. Again, we'll just have to wait and see what happens, but I can't help but feel like increasing the amount of sprint races is just a cash grab, especially when we hear news like Gatorade signing on to be the official sprint race partner for Formula One. The writing's on the wall, but sprint races are here to stay, so I guess we're just going to have to put up with them. The next thing I want to touch on before we get into our predictions is the start times for the 2026 calendar. Most notably Canada, the start time has changed for that so that there is no clash with the running of the Indy 500. I am glad that that has happened. Fans will be able to now watch the Canadian Grand Prix and then go straight into watching the Indianapolis 500. F1 scheduling the Canadian Grand Prix the same day as the Indy 500 was maybe F1 being a little bit too sure of itself, and I was saying when it was released, the calendar was released, that I would be really interested to see the viewership figures after the race next year to see if there is a significant dip in viewership because people are also watching the Indy 500. However, F1 is very smartly avoiding that type of situation, which I'm kind of glad about. I mean, it's obviously because they don't want their viewership figures to be down, I'm assuming. Regardless, I'm happy either way. All right, moving on to our predictions and kicking things off with pole position, Charles Leclerc. Listen, we know he can do it. He's been on pole this year already. He has been on pole the last 4 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Never won it, but he has been on pole the past 4. I'm calling it delusion. I'm calling it delusion that he will get pole position. As I've said before, when I put Charles on pole, my delusion doesn't reach the levels that I think he could win it. In fact, I don't even think he'll step foot on the podium. Ferrari's race pace has been pretty poor this year, and we are very much running out of time for a Ferrari win. I actually think that we're going to see out the year with Ferrari having won nil, nada, 0 races. But I do think Charles could get pole in Baku. He is lightning around this track, but I think that manifests itself more into a 1-lap pace, which I think will get him pole for it to maybe just fall apart a little bit in the race because there's faster cars around them. And for P3 in the race, I've gone Max Verstappen. Baku isn't quite Monza. There is a few similar characteristics. It's very fast paced. There is very long straights. However, 2 very different types of circuits. Baku has a lot of high speed straights that go into quite sharp 90-degree corners. I think that that might show the weaknesses of the Red Bull. I think it'll be quick. I don't think he'll be quick like last time in Monza, but I do think it's still a podium for Max. For P2 in the race, I've gone Lando Norris, and I think he'll have a good weekend. I don't think it'll be the best weekend possible, but I do think he'll have a good weekend, and that's all I really have to say for Lando. In P1, I've gone Oscar Piastri. After last week, I reckon Oscar's coming to Baku taking absolutely no shit. He's coming back with an absolute banger drive. I think he'll be pretty close in qualifying, but Charles will just pull something crazy out of the bag that nobody sees coming. I think he'll absolutely send it. I think he'll open up a bit of a gap, and I think that he will win pretty comfortably this weekend. Not a crazy 20-second gap like Max Verstappen, but maybe a wee 5-6 seconds. But I do think Oscar will win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. He had an incredible race here last year with a phenomenal move on Charles Leclerc to take the win. So I think he's got this one in the bag. Speaking of McLaren, my next prediction, McLaren will secure the Constructors Championship this week. And it's not so much a prediction, kind of feels more of a statement of fact that it will happen. McLaren will become the champions in Azerbaijan if they outscore the other teams by 9 points. Their mission is to finish 1-2, which seems pretty comfortable, or 1-3 to guarantee the championship title. Failing securing a 1-2 or a 1-3, they can still secure the championship if they outscore Ferrari by 9 points, not be outscored by Mercedes by 12 points, and not be outscored by Red Bull by 33 points. I think it's a pretty slam dunk that McLaren's got the championship, and I think it's the earliest that a team has ever been able to secure a championship in Formula One history. So well done to McLaren for that. I know they've not actually done it yet, but it feels almost a dead certain. That being said, I do think Papaya Rules will come back to play this weekend in some form. I don't know how, but it feels like McLaren have maybe set themselves up to fail with their current interfering and meddling between the two drivers, and it feels like it might come back and bite them in the ass again this weekend, and they maybe won't act on something and it causes a complete uproar. I don't know, I just feel like they've set themselves a dangerous precedent and they've opened themselves up to a multitude of possibilities where they are not going to do the right thing by one side of the garage, and it's going to set everyone off, and we'll all be needing a break again. My next prediction, Oliver Bearman gets a race ban. He is 2 penalty points away from getting a race ban in his rookie year, and I feel like we're not actually speaking about that enough. That is pretty wild that in his rookie year he has 8 races left and he's 2 points away from getting a race ban. I'm not actually too sure when he got his first penalty points. Was it maybe last year sometime when he was subbing in, when he was the super sub? I don't know, but it definitely feels like it's looming. And if it's not this weekend, I reckon it'll be sometime over the next 8 races. Baku is unforgiving and it is very easy to make mistakes around here. And I can just see Bearman getting caught up, having a bit of a moment, causing a little bit of accident, and getting penalised for it by the FIA and getting a couple of penalty points and then having to sit out next week, which I think is Singapore. Finally, we will get multiple safety cars throughout the Grand Prix. Baku breeds safety cars. As soon as you get one, you're going to get a lot more, and I can just see it this weekend. We've got an incredibly tight field. We've got a lot of drivers fighting for points positions. I can see there being a bit of chaos, and as I said, once you get one, Baku breeds them. I'm putting it out there. Hope we don't, because that means, you know, we've had a pretty clean race, but it's Baku, it's Azerbaijan. There's always a bit of craziness. I mean, it's either going to be a little bit of craziness or it's going to be dull as dishwater, but I'm hoping for a bit of a banger. And that is everything from us. We'll be back very soon. Drop your predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix down below in the comments. See you very soon. I love you. Bye.